we're starting to see this American dynamism zeitgeist take place, which is it's encouraging, right? And I think we're extremely well positioned to fulfill that and to have almost this industrial renaissance where, we like to say our tagline is bridging the gap between the region's industrial heritage and its industrial future. I think that starts with us, right?
Let's discover what people are building in the greater Cleveland community. We are telling the stories of Northeast Ohio's entrepreneurs, builders, and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with Andrew Rising, CEO of Encore Venture Labs. As soon as I met Andrew, I knew that one day he would come on the podcast when the time is right, and I am very excited that that time has now come. As someone who believes deeply in the opportunity for Cleveland's future, I find Andrew's journey to be an inspiring and optimistic one, deeply rooted in the heart of Cleveland's West Side where he grew up before embarking on a decade-long adventure in the Bay Area, a place where innovation and venture capital converge to create world-changing technologies. Andrew has spent his career at the intersection of talent and venture capital, from Google to Addepar to Redpoint Ventures, ultimately carving out a unique path that led him to co-found and successfully exit a startup to human capital in one of the most competitive ecosystems in the world. But despite his success on the West Coast, Cleveland was always his home. In a full circle moment, Andrew returned to his hometown in 2022, bringing with him a wealth of experience and a vision to bridge the gap between Cleveland's rich industrial heritage and its promising industrial future. Today, he is leading the charge as the founder of Encore Venture Labs, a venture studio dedicated to revitalizing the region's legacy by harnessing current macro trends with the region's unique attributes. Andrew's story is one of return, of reinvestment, and of a deep commitment to driving the next wave of growth in Northeast Ohio. I'm proud to consider Andrew a friend, and I'm excited to share some of his reflections and experience. So please enjoy my conversation with Andrew Rising after a brief message from our sponsor. Lay of the Land is brought to you by John Carroll University's Boler College of Business, widely recognized as one of the top business schools in the region. As we've heard time and time again from entrepreneurs here on Lay of the Land, many of whom are proud alumni of John Carroll University, success in this ever-changing world of business requires a dynamic and innovative mindset, deep understanding of emerging technologies and systems, strong ethics, leadership prowess, acute business acumen, all qualities nurtured through the Boler College of Business. With 4 different MBA programs of study spanning professional, online, hybrid, and 1-year flexible, the Boler College of Business provides flexible timelines and various class structures for each MBA track, including online, in-person, hybrid, and asynchronous, all to offer the most effective options for you, including the ability to participate in an elective international study tour, providing unparalleled opportunities to expand your global business knowledge by networking with local companies overseas and experiencing a new culture. The career impact of a Boler MBA is formative and will help prepare you for this future of business and get more out of your career. To learn more about John Carroll University's Boler MBA programs, please go to business.jcu.edu. The Boler College of Business is fully accredited by AACSB International, the highest accreditation a college of business can have. So I was thinking about where the best place to start is. And so one day I knew you would be sharing your story on this podcast. And so I'm glad that this day is finally upon us. When I think about the new vanguard of entrepreneurs in Cleveland who, as we have talked about before, are trying to raise the collective bar of ambition and recognize kind of this culture of excellence within Cleveland and throughout the region, you are always top of mind. And I often cite your story to other people as like, where some of my own optimism about this place comes from. And so I don't want to lead, the witness too much here and, and spoil the telling of your own story. But the power of the boomerang concept is one that I feel is best exemplified in your journey. And so I am excited to listen to it in a way that you've thought about it and reflected on it thus far.
Yeah, Jeff, it's great to be here. And I know we've kind of been friends for almost just over 2 years at this point, I think. I shot you a connection request when I was living in San Jose in early 2022, I think, knowing that I would be moving back to Cleveland, and you were doing this Lay of the Land podcast, and I thought it was incredible. And sure enough, we had some mutual connections and then jumped on a call. I think you were still at Actual at that point. And then, we kind of just hit it off, and then I moved back and we've been friends ever since. So it's really exciting to be on the pod, and thanks for having me. Just to go into the background, born and raised a Clevelander, grew up on the west side of Cleveland in Lakewood and North Ridgeville, went to St. Ignatius, studied finance at Ohio University. By virtue of going to Ohio University and having a decent amount of fun there, I was not getting any looks from the structured products division of Goldman Sachs. And that's okay with me, because I was actually getting really interested in organizational development, organizational design, how you incentivize individuals to reach overarching objectives. I think, by virtue of being in finance for a little while, it's very easy to say on a spreadsheet, hey, we need to increase our gross margins by 8% this quarter or this year or whatever. But incentivizing the individuals on the teams that can actually drive those outcomes is the much, much, much more difficult part. So got into the talent world through that vector, was working with companies in Chicago in aerospace and automotive, like working with the Northrop Grummons of the world, working with the Ford and the Ford stamping plant, the south side of Chicago. And then, companies as small as the ones that make the gears on the Chinook helicopters, the North Star Aerospace of the world. But it was fascinating to partner with these plants and these plant managers and these production supervisors that were really trying to organize their teams to hit an overarching objective, whether that be on production or whatever. So I had a ton of fun there, but got a shout out from the West Coast to go work at Google and build engineering teams out there. And that was a huge opportunity for me. One, I wanted to fulfill this personal manifest destiny to go out to the West Coast and compete with the best and the brightest. But it was also just, when you get a shout from Google, it's pretty hard to say no. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience there, getting to work on their main campus, helping them build their software engineering teams. And I thought the interesting piece relative to talent there was, versus the Chicago big, broad shoulder industrial society versus Google, hypertech, all that fun Silicon Valley world is, hey, instead of being at Ford and saying, hey, we need a production supervisor for this shift at this time and we're going to pay them this number. Instead, it was Google saying, hey, go find the smartest human being on the face of the earth and we will figure out what to do with them. And so that just totally shifted your mentality around what the type of quality and talent and caliber was. And it was just a very, very interesting and dynamic place to be. This is back in 2013 when things were still really cool and fun and exciting at Google. So really, really enjoyed my time there. After that, I had the opportunity to really marry my understanding and passion for finance with my ability to build what I deem to be world-class engineering and technical talent teams. And so I came across this company called Addepar. It is a wealth management technology, really originally focused on the RIAs or the single family offices or the multifamily offices, all stemmed around like a unified data platform to provide insights in real time. And in the financial world, when you're dealing with these massively complex portfolios of anything relative to different asset classes, different custodians, different currencies, crazy ownership structures, it was a very, very nuanced problem and a very fun problem to go after. And some of the folks that have come out of Addepar have just been absolutely amazing. Like, I think Alexander Wang was one of the interns when I was there, who runs Scale AI, now north of a $12 billion valuation. Scott Wu, who runs Cognition AI. I don't know if you've seen that come around recently with this like AI engineer is called Devin. They've, I think, reached a $2 billion valuation within 6 months of starting the company. Like, these guys were our interns at that point. So it was a ton of fun. But at any rate, yeah, my mandate there was jumping on board as the 50th employee, helping them scale up their product and engineering organization, really working directly with the CEO, the CFO, the CTO to ensure that we are building the teams the right way such that we can get to that next mark. And in that world, it was the next fundraise, or it was the next ARR target, or it was in fact increasing a gross margin percentage, which alluded to before. But at any rate, yeah, it was a ton of fun. I think that the biggest win there, though, I will say, is I had the opportunity to meet my wife at Addepar. So that was easily the biggest win. And we'll both celebrate, hopefully, a liquidity event at some point. But they're right now sitting around a $2.2 billion valuation, which is a good deal. And hopefully we'll see a lot more there. So after that, joined a venture capital firm called Redpoint Ventures, $4 billion AUM fund at that point. They've invested in things all the way back to like TiVo. If some of the listeners
sure.
remember when you could actually pause live TV, that was a wild experience. But they, were involved in Stripe and some other, big names as well. My mandate there was interesting in that, like, around 2016, 2017, a lot of the venture firms on Sand Hill Road were really going after a lot of the similar subsets of companies. Like, there is this competition inside of the VC firms in Menlo Park and on Sand Hill Road that, how can you win deals versus other ones? You see the Founders Fund, hence the name Founders Fund is we will never go against a founder that we want to partner with. A lot of other firms use services. You've got the Andreessen Horowitzes that have 50, 60 people, talent and services teams or platform teams as they're determined now. That was becoming a huge area. And I knew I wanted some exposure into venture in some capacity. I was just fascinated by it. And this was my opportunity to jump into it. So Redpoint Ventures, awesome people. Every single person I met there was a world-class thinker and also just an unbelievable investor. So they've done a really nice job on the enterprise side. And my mandate was really to work with our early stage portfolio, anything pre-seed, seed, Series A, sometimes getting into the Series B, really helping those individuals and those teams think through how they could scale their organizations most effectively. And so I would be sitting in, meetings with some of the partners on Mondays in Menlo Park in my world-class 3,000 or I think it was 3,000 Sand Hill Road was our address at Redpoint. And, the most expensive real estate in the world. And then I'd drive up and go hang out with like one of the Series A companies that we just invested in. It was working out of just the absolute worst part of San Francisco where, you have to be pretty well protected in order to survive out there. But it was a ton of fun and a really interesting, amazing contrast. But really, really fun experience watching teams go from that true 0 to 1, or once they've raised their first round of funding, how they think about finding product market fit. Just really, really interesting dynamics there. And then helping them coach their mentality around, how to think about scaling and acquiring and incentivizing the world-class talent to join them and to build with them. So that was a ton of fun. At Redpoint, I met a guy named Archit Beast, who was again, just fantastic human being and unbelievable thinker. MITCS, Harvard Business School. He was an associate on the team at that point and started a company called Wellframe that had done really well out of MIT. And he would come over to my desk and we would kind of jam on what the recruiting world and general like global staffing world would look like over, the next decade or so. And he's like, hey, I've got this tool called like GPT 2.5 that we should tinker around with. I think it's pretty interesting. And this is back when like Google could you couldn't really fill the sentences, but this thing could. You could basically go in and say like, type an email that says this, and like it would somewhat fill like a paragraph, and that was it. But nothing like the capability we have now. And but you see that, you're like, oh my God, this is going to fundamentally change how this entire industry operates. And so our thesis was, if you could effectively automate everything in the back office that a recruiter or a staffing individual or even an executive search individual does, such that you're empowering the human to do what they do best, which is talking to candidates and customers, I think you have a potential business there. So we started that business, left Redpoint, started that business, raised a little bit of cash, ran some really interesting experiments. I think one of the ways that we trained, one of the more fun experiments was hiring like 20 South African copywriters. They have just this like wonderful prose and this ability to communicate effectively. And so we basically said, here, it's like take 1,000 LinkedIn profiles. We want you to write hyper-personalized messages to each of these individuals such that it can train our models that when we click on your profile, Jeff Stern, Cornell, like we can write a beautiful, well thought out email within one click by virtue of, taking all these wonderful, wonderful copywriters, pros and their ability to write hyper-personalized messages. And it was a cool experiment with them and tons of fun. And yeah, we ran that business for about 3 years, built some really interesting technology with that, eventually got that business acquired. And then I ended up joining a venture capital firm called Human Capital. world-class institution with them. It was really created by two Stanford grads that recognize two things: smart people know smart people, and talent drives outcomes. Hence the name Human Capital. And my role as an operating partner there was relatively similar to what it was at Redpoint Ventures, albeit, I got to work a lot closer with some of the Series A and Series B companies that I was super interested in working with. And so, built great relationships there and had a wonderful time. And I think, that venture firm is absolutely crushing it right now. So luckily we got that business acquired. Surprisingly, like, again, in a stroke of luck, or I'm forever blessed, or whatever it might be, but the ink got dry on our acquisition deal on March 2nd, 2020, which is, extremely lucky. If that doesn't take place, I doubt I'm talking to you here, Jeff. But all good things. I jumped on as an operating partner, Human Capital, and have been there really, for the last 3.5 years. And then I moved back to Cleveland in June of 2022, still working there. But I think that's when we got together. We started to meet.
And it comes full circle. I mean, it's really a rocket ship of a career trajectory and journey that you've been on. And I actually haven't even heard you kind of lay it all out like that. But I think it's made a lot more things to me make sense about the journey you are on. I mean, really, the proximity to talent that you've had throughout it, the kind of all of it embedded in the Silicon Valley ethos of it. I mean, there are many questions I want to ask as we make our way towards Encore Ventures and the work you're doing now. But even just to set a bit more of the stage,
sure.
What drew you to entrepreneurship in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question and kind of an interesting answer. For lack of a better term, I was a terrible student. I just sucked at. I mean, I was fine actually. I was actually relatively intelligent, but I didn't believe in any of the stuff that I was doing. Like, I just didn't care, and that's a horrible thing to say now, and it probably not something my investors wanted to hear. But at any rate, like, I think until you really find that thing that like lights a fire under you, it's very difficult to try and just slog through. I was sharp enough, so I went to a Montessori school in grade school from pre-K to 8th grade and until Ignatius, and we didn't have grades, but we had one test at the end of every year. And I knew, I was going to do pretty okay on that test. And I don't think I ever got less than like a 93 or 94% on those standard achievement tests that would allow you to, move on to the next level. So like the whole year, yes, you needed to learn and you needed to do well on tests, but there was no Fs or there was nothing there. It was just this end of year test that, I knew I was going to be able to be okay on. And I wanted to learn about the stuff that I genuinely wanted to learn. And I actually love the Montessori mentality. I think it's super, super sharp. I think you can elevate it a little bit more, and I'm excited to see what the future of education actually looks like. But going back to what actually did light that fire under me, so my mom and dad have been split up since I was a kid, but had a wonderful relationship with each other and raised me, an extremely loving, household, and yeah, it was just a great upbringing. I'm an only child, and so they both got to raise me the way that they wanted to, and in a very familial way. And so I would go to my dad's house, usually on the weekends, but it was very random whenever like he wanted to or my mom wanted to. So I would go over to his house, and he was an entrepreneur by trade. He was a longtime sales guy, ended up getting into real estate, some issues obviously in 2008, bought some gyms, did really well at the gyms, had some other landscaping stuff, had a concrete business. Like the old Rising business is a concrete family, like way back multi-generation ago. But I ended up selling out of that. And so, we have all these different interesting nuances. So I knew he was always this like weird guy that always had a bunch of different projects going on. And he's like, hey, I'm reading this book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think you should read it. And I was like, okay, like why not? It seems somewhat interesting and cool title. Whatever Kiyosaki has gone on to these days, I don't really pay attention to. But at least at that book, I was 9 years old reading it. And there was just this like unlock that happened. It was just this unbelievable, like, holy shnikes. This is the key to the universe. You're saying if all I have to do is figure out enough ways for my assets to cover my liabilities, I can live a financially free life in perpetuity. Like, that seems pretty legit. That means I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. I don't really have to think about, oh, you have this big test coming up and you need to study for finance class. You need to study for, no, it's just assets and liabilities. Are you making money or are you losing money? And it's just very like very, very interesting dynamic of like that single book kind of shaped a lot of my life in that, my dad would grill me with handwritten tests on those like yellow legal pad notes
Yeah.
every Saturday when I would go to his house, and we would be eating cookies and coffee and taking tests on all the different chapters of Rich Dad Poor Dad. So tons of fun. And I think at that moment, it was like, okay, I know I have to build something. Either you're the leader of the pack or the scenery never changes. There's no point in like slogging through a company man career, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just what I'm not uniquely qualified and what I'm not really that good at. I can do it to a certain level because I know I'm capable to, but it's not my true passion of what I actually genuinely want to do with my life. So very, very long-winded answer there, but I think that ties into like the very, very spawning of the entrepreneurial mindset.
Wow. Awesome. So you layer those two things together and you make your way back here to Cleveland. And I remember, again, when we first connected, the beginning of the exploration of this idea maze of trying to hone in and figure out what it is exactly that you're going to be working on and what Encore Venture Labs would eventually become here. I would love to understand, especially given kind of the myriad of things you had worked on prior in your career, how you approach this problem of like true greenfield, trying to understand what you did actually want to devote your time and energy to building.
Yeah, I think that the idea maze is a good way to frame it. I mean, I think there's just, for lack of better term, you need to just have hundreds of conversations with people from all different walks of life to really understand, like, is there something there? Like the cliche, is there a there? I think knowing I wanted to go build something again, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to build, right? And I was still working at HC at this point, so I had the freedom to just have conversations and be a little bit more flexible while still, maintaining a decent income. But at any rate, you put a couple questions on yourself and then extrapolate that out to like the region and the city and what we're uniquely qualified to do and why right now. And I think that's a question that often comes from any venture capitalist that's ever had a single meeting with a founder. Those are the first two questions typically that you ask, or why are you uniquely qualified to build this business and why right now, right? That gets you a relatively clear level of understanding of, does this person understand the problem set in which they're attempting to solve? And two, is the timing right? Because timing matters so much. And so I think after I had a bunch of different conversations, it was, okay, like, do I start a company or do I raise a fund? Or is there some hybrid of both? I know there's a lot of different things that have been tried. And so at the end of the day, like, one, I didn't think that I could raise a fund to the level at which it would make sense economically, because really, unless you raise a venture fund around 20 to 30 to maybe 50 million, the economics are super tough in that, the average check size that you're going to write versus the outcomes needed to generate value that, you're not even going to create a 2 to 3x on that fund. So it made me realize that, okay, like, I probably don't think I'm going to do anything relative to a fund. And then on the company side, I'm like, yeah, I really like the talent world. I think obviously with AI right now, I think there's a ton of stuff you can do. It's super frothy. It doesn't really make a ton of sense, but I do feel as though I'm probably a better operator than I am an investor. I'm no better dart thrower than the next guy. And then you also have to look at like the talent ecosystem and the level of talent density that you have in a specific area, such that you could either invest in deals or partner with folks. And so I said, okay, like let's take a step back and cliche again, think from first principles and say, okay, like if you had to build this thing from scratch, what would you build? Well, let's take a look at the city, the region, what are we uniquely qualified to build in and why right now? And I think you look at a lot of the macro trends that we're seeing with anything relative to geopolitics or socioeconomics or climate. And I think there's a lot of interesting tailwinds taking place there that drive a lot of interest into the Great Lakes region and Cleveland more broadly, more specifically, just by virtue of our proximity to freshwater and the Great Lakes. And so that was one unique thing that I kind of came across. I think there's also just the notion of like geographic benefit that you have, from a supply chain perspective, we're accessible to the entire, I think we have 70% of the US within 1 day air travel from like a shipping perspective. I think you look at just the general populace, we are ninth in population. We are, I think, third in like able working population. I think we're seventh in GDP. We've got north of 10,000 plus manufacturing facilities in the state of Ohio alone, right? And these are all a lot of things that I think Jacob Doritsky over at Team Neo, but like that guy is just like a fire hose of data and information. I try and just collect as much as I possibly can. And so like meeting with folks like him to understand like what are our actual opportunities and really distilling that down to a specific vision. So, okay, knowing that we have these trends, knowing that we have this capability, what can actually be built? And then I got really down into the venture studio model with a guy named Grant Morgan, who runs a thing called One Dream Ventures. It was up in Detroit in New Lab up there, which is a phenomenal area we've actually been to together. But he kind of said, hey, listen, if your goal is to kind of create a resurgence in a risk on asset class, like let's go whiteboard what that could actually look like. And we ended up spending quite a few hours together and really kind of coming to the conclusion that, the venture studio model is probably the right model for a relatively nascent from a venture as an asset class perspective in the city of Cleveland. But then also, it allows you to raise less funds, maintain higher ownership structures, and actually build from the ground up, right? I don't know if I can go out to the market right now and say, yes, there's probably 10 founders that I would just love to invest in. I don't know if there's a bunch of, Jeff Stearns running around or Leo's running around. And if they are, please, I would love to meet you. But I don't know if that's there. So I think it really allowed me to condense my thought and say, okay, like what am I personally now uniquely qualified to build and why right now? And it kind of like led my journey of like all these culminations of things, both specifically with like what I want to do in my future for the next 20 to 30 years, along with what the city and the region more broadly is capable to do over the next 20 to 30 years. And then along with like the geographic benefits that we just generally have here and what technological advancements can really be layered on to the infrastructure that's already been created. So I think all those things culminated in this approach of saying, okay, like I have to go do this. Let's go build. And so that was effectively like how things kind of came to fruition. But yeah, hundreds of conversations. I like to call it the random walk or the idea maze, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, on the other side of that walk, understanding it's maybe bookend by strictly a founder, entrepreneur, and an investor on the other side. What exactly is a venture studio?
Yeah, so a venture studio is basically a startup factory or a company factory. What it does is it builds and launches startups that provides funding, guidance, shared services. The goal is effectively to say, hey, we're going to ruthlessly test this thing such that we have a relatively higher significance or probability of success than otherwise, without any approach or just general venture funding model, right? Because you're a venture fund, you say, hey, like I trust your team, you guys go figure it out. Maybe we'll help you out with some different areas, and maybe it might even be like recruiting or something. But with the venture studio, you have a lot more control. So I think there's a couple key components to it. I mean, anything that I like to, I guess, like the stages, idea generation, anything relative to like the validation process, meaning that rigorous testing and validating ideas through whether it be market research or customer feedback. I think that's the biggest thing is just go talk to your customers. I think that's actually like sneaky. My favorite meme is like, the one with the bell curve and you have the Jedi on the one end and the dummy on the other. And then just like the like angry guy in the middle. That's my own, just like, even though like venture studio can like say some of the rigorous testing, all that, I'm like, no, it's actually just like go talk to your customers. Do you have product market fit? Do you have customer market fit? That'll pretty much win the day. But at any rate, like that is the validation process that you're effectively looking for. Another piece what I would say is like resource allocation. So ensuring that you can actually provide them with the financial support and the operational infrastructure to be successful. Because if I have an entrepreneur in residence that, really just wants to go build, let me handle all the BS as a quote unquote co-founder that you don't want to handle, like setting up Jira or setting up Slack or setting up your email or trying to figure out taxes, like actually figuring out your financial model and all this stuff. And then we'll also be, supportive on go-to-market and different things like that. But team and expertise, I think, would be another thing, really surrounding those individuals with a skilled team and a huge network. Building and scaling, I think that's where, providing support in prototyping or MVP production. Ownership and investment is kind of like a main piece of it where, the reason you would work with a studio is effectively to say, hey, like I need a co-founder. I've got this idea. I think it's something really interesting, but I need some help really validating it such that, we can actually launch this thing into market. With that comes naturally, a stake. We'll obviously put capital in, but we're also going to expect that we're going to have a relatively higher percentage ownership versus any other venture firm that we might run into down the road. And then again, it's just this hardcore focus on managing multiple startups, leveraging economies of scale, increasing success rates, and ideally, driving meaningful outcomes. So it's kind of a winding area, but again, just to distill that down: idea generation, validation process, resource allocation, team and expertise, building and scaling, and then ownership and investment.
Lay of the Land is brought to you by Impact Architects and by 90. As we share the stories of entrepreneurs building incredible organizations in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio, Impact Architects has helped hundreds of those leaders, many of whom we have heard from as guests on this very podcast, realize their own visions and build these great organizations. I believe in Impact Architects and the people behind it so much that I have actually joined them personally in their mission to help leaders gain focus, align together, and thrive by doing what they love. If you too are trying to build great, Impact Architects is offering to sit down with you for a free consultation or provide a free trial through 90, the software platform that helps teams build great companies. If you are interested in learning more about partnering with Impact Architects or by leveraging 90 to power your own business, please go to ia.layoftheland.fm. The link will also be in our show notes. So back to this founding question with that context in place, when you pose what are we as a region uniquely qualified to build and why now, the answer you come to is Encore Venture Labs. So help paint a picture for us of what this organization is, what does it look like, what are you trying to accomplish here, and really what your long-term visions and goals are as you build it.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think right now what we've seen, and I think there's this really cool thing that we're starting to see this American dynamism zeitgeist take place, which is it's encouraging, right? And I think we're extremely well positioned to fulfill that and to have almost this industrial renaissance where we like to say our tagline is bridging the gap between the region's industrial heritage and its industrial future. And I think that starts with us, right? It starts with the companies in which we build. And so, we're going to focus on a couple key sectors, again, that we are uniquely qualified to build in. I think that's anything relative to advanced manufacturing, anything relative to the water economy, and then anything relative to clean power and energy. I think there's an underpinning current also of workforce development, preparing our individuals to take advantage of, these emerging technologies like semiconductors and the electrification of everything. And so that will be a constant current that I just have a personal focus on because that's been my entire background, for lack of a better term. But at the end of the day, our job is to really build consistent winners, right? I think, building companies that have alumni that can then go out and build the next generation of companies really creates a wonderful ecosystem of success, for lack of a better term. And I think we as Clevelanders, which again, you are adopted son of Cleveland for sure. I think you've noticed this
in spirit.
Right, obviously. I think you've noticed this, that there's like this, it's like self-deprecating, but almost to the level of like self-hatred of this weird belief that we don't deserve greatness when so many world-class things and people and technologies have actually come from this area. It frustrates me to no end because sometimes our sports teams are bad and it's gray a little bit. That doesn't mean our whole world sucks. We actually have a ton of really, really interesting talent and capabilities and people. It's our job, I think, at Encore to say, hey, our turn or our time for our second act, hence the name Encore Ventures, Venture Labs. So I think that's where we want to get back to. I think, there's this terminology, it's like a keiretsu, which is effectively like an interdependent group of companies with its own banking partner, manufacturer, distributor, and supply chain partners. My vision is kind of to build that, but in, again, the sectors, whether it be energy or advanced manufacturing or water economy, build that in this Cleveland world such that you're this epicenter of a specific, industrial renaissance, right? And I think that's where we get a really, really, that's where the narrative has really kind of struck a chord with a lot of the investors, because a lot of the folks that we talk to, whether they be family offices or institutions, are relatively, not really exposed to venture as an asset class, or haven't really heard of a venture studio. And that's why I've kind of been making a lot of these silly videos that have been flooding the LinkedIn airwaves. And apologies for having to see my face and listen to my voice all the time. But I think that's, where we want to get really to with the sectors in which we can actually dominate it. And so a lot of these folks are saying, you know what, it is that time. We need a group of what lack of a better term, killers, or really, really capable entrepreneurs that understand growth, understand how to go 0 to 1, and then understand how to scale. They know how to operate these things at a really, really, really efficient level. And I think we need to see a lot more of that. And that's where, Encore needs to be a group of individuals that are launching companies that are absolute killers, right? I think that's the only way that this thing works out. And I'm very excited to get after it. So that's where we're at.
So where is Encore Venture Labs today? And how do you, with that, refine this thesis of, clean energy, freshwater industry, manufacturing, and like hone in on what are some of the ideas that you're actually excited about pursuing, validating, going through that whole process that you outlined earlier?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so just to highlight where we're at, we really, so the overall fund is a $3 million fund. This is phase one. So the phase one is a $3 million fund where we just actually initiated our first close last week. So actively chatting quite a bit with Calfee, our law firm here in Cleveland. They've done a nice job. And so we're actively getting some money wired to us now, which is really exciting. So we're going to do our official launch on the 15th. So yeah, $3 million fund, first close at $1 million. We'll still have $2 million out after that. So looking to close that within the next 6 months, which will be exciting. But the initial $1 million allows us to really get our first 2 companies off the ground. And so with that $3 million, you launch 6 companies. Let's assume you're going to earmark $500K for each company. Let's assume $250 for validation processes and then $250 to seed the company. With that, we expect to maintain anywhere from 35 to 50% ownership of the business, depending on if we have an EIR lead it or if we actually lead the business at the offset. And yeah, we're super, super excited about a lot of the companies that we're already starting to validate. So yeah, some of the companies that we're actively working on validating right now, like one is in the 3D digital asset management space. I think there's a potential long tail opportunity there for anything relative to additive manufacturing or 3D printing. I think there's some other things in like the water economy that are super interesting relative to whether it be industrial sensor technology or even to the level at which like a non-toxic biocide might make sense for industrial cooling towers, right? So traditionally, like those have to be moved and there's a lot of EPA risk and costs and different things associated with it. Instead, if we could develop, the chemistry such that, this biocide and it could be poured down the drain, that would be a wonderful, wonderful outcome. Right, so you're preserving habitats, you're saving money, and you're doing well for the environment, while also ideally making sure that all of our stuff is still cool. So yeah, those are a couple things that we're actively working on right now. I think there's quite a few more. We've got really like 6 active builds that we're validating, and those are in each different stages of the process.
So you mentioned the EIR, the entrepreneur in residence, and part of what I imagine is the core competency that you need to have, and ultimately one of the hardest challenges of your job as a venture studio is to find the right leader to run and operate the venture after you've achieved a level of de-risking and validation.
Yep.
And I kind of love the Google framing of that, task you had at the time, which is, go find the best qualified person in the world for this job. And knowing that is your background and experience, how you've kind of integrated the current opportunity for Encore and how you're thinking about, finding the best person to do and run with these opportunities as you built them, and the role that Cleveland plays in that as well.
Yeah, I think it goes back to my entire career is effectively like one thing of talent drives outcomes, right? And I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's where I want to get explicitly clear on, the intention of Encore is to work with world-class individuals that build world-class institutions, right? That's the only way I think you can actually become some sort of hub of anything. And I think we often rely too much on this notion of like, well, we can be the next Silicon Valley or the next Columbus, even, which makes me want to puke. But I think there's like, we want to be the number one Cleveland. We were once this globally prominent industrial hub, and it's our opportunity to do it again. The only way that we can do that is if we have world-class builders building interesting business that are actually relevant, right? And so with that, I mean, we've gone many strides and lengths to really curate a group of individuals that we do believe can build billion-dollar businesses, right? And that's, I guess, like the core analog that if you think about it from a venture scale perspective. But this is just someone that I know when the chips get down, they're going to figure it out, right? And obviously, we're going to support them throughout the entire journey. But this goes into entirely like my recruiting and talent acquisition and exec search background of you need to build your short list. You need to talk with those people. You need to talk with the people that know those people and understand who these folks are really about. You need to spend time with them. You need to go on walks. You need to have dinners with them. You need to understand them to a core and what really drives them and incentivizes them such that you're pretty aligned when, inevitably there's going to be disagreements, right? But you have to know that there's going to be a very clear overarching objective of, I would rather die than have this company fail, right? And I think that's where, when we talk about raising the bar, and you look at guys like Dallas, you look at guys like Aaron Slodov, I think like some of those are the individuals that I point to, and I really find solace in, where we can sit down for dinner and talk for hours strictly on what's going on in their business and just have an absolute blast doing it and trying to solve each other's problems. But knowing that, of course, like that is the number one thing that they are focused on without a doubt. And I just love those sessions. And so like, how can you find a similar group of individuals that this is their entire existence? And I think that's where we want to get to. So it's that like obsession, obsessive nature of a world-class founder that you look for.
And I think you've hinted at, what the answer to this question might be in your laying out of even the founding question of what are we uniquely qualified to do and why now? And it's kind of grounding in Cleveland and the structural trends involved. But explicitly, how do you gauge success in this? And like ultimately the impact that you hope to have with the perspective of retrospect?
Yeah, I think we're sitting here in 20 years, and we're talking about, man, that really worked out, didn't it? It's a couple key things, right? I think naturally, I think you whether fortunately or unfortunately, you have to look at the numbers. What was your win rate? How many companies have had a liquidity event? I think that's one just arbitrary metric. How much did you return to your investors? What was your MOIC? What was your IRR? All that good stuff. But I think there's another one that I like to call like the slugging percentage. And so for the baseball fans, they'll understand what that means. But effectively, the slugging percentage is a statistic that measures a batter's productivity by calculating the average number of bases they reach per at bat. And so I think when I apply that to our world, it's basically saying, okay, how many of the companies that we started actually are still generating significant returns by virtue of maybe not being a venture backable company? So if it happens to be this non-toxic biocide that we end up creating, like, is that a company that can exist in perpetuity, that can generate year over year growth, that can maintain 40% margin or gross margins, can it maintain 15, 20% EBIT margins? Like, let's understand what that actually looks like and quantify that. Because to me, those businesses are probably going to put quite a few people to work. They're going to put quite a few, plates of food on the table for individuals. And ideally, you're creating a long-term sustainable business. Because when I came back, there was effectively, three goals that I wanted to achieve. It was, one, I want to create economic development for the city and region in which I was born. Two was I want to build sustainable businesses. And three, I wanted the ability to take asymmetric upside bets. And that's what a lot of this is. And so I think like those would be the two things that I think from a company success perspective or like a fund success perspective. I think the last one there is, we talk about it in Silicon Valley quite a bit, where you have, the PayPal mafia or the Stripe mafia or all these different things. I'd love to see some semblance of that, meaning how many people that came through Encore, whether it be as a founder or as an individual on our team, or even as an individual on any of the teams that we spawn, have gone on to start companies. And I think that's an interesting metric. And I think that's something that I really want to lean into a little bit more, because if you can build this culture of excellence and raise the bar, those individuals that are part of that team will want to go start something on their own. And those individuals that are on the team that they're leaving should be supporting them to go do such things, and ideally even with capital. And I think that's how you really build, again, more cliche startup terms, but the flywheel. Such that, like, right now, again, we're at this like first crank of the flywheel, which is obviously the most difficult by far, but it's also, where I find some solace and I find comfort in chaos. And so I love getting into the early stages of things. And so again, this is phase one. I think phase two of Encore looks a little bit different in that it's going to be a much larger fund with still a studio component. So let's say it's a 10, 20, $30 million fund. And then I think in 5-6 years, phase three is when that true, dual entity venture capital fund, studio, 50, 70, $100 million fund starts to take place. And so again, we're starting with this $3 million fund. We want to take a pragmatic approach, but I think there's a lot that will be evolving over the next couple of months. And yeah, we'll see where we net out, but couldn't be more excited.
And it is very exciting. Having been through the entrepreneurial journey already on your own projects, I mean, really from inception through to acquisition, and then simultaneously working with many other companies through their own journeys, what are you doing differently this time around? What are some of your own lessons learned as an entrepreneur that you carry with you into a new undertaking?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's there's a couple of things that might be like hot takey, I guess. I don't want to like make hot takes or anything like that, but I think
let's hear them.
Well, I mean, it's kind of cliche, but I think that this is where the best builders that I had the opportunity to work with, and even in my own company when we would launch it, we were just so freaking heads down that we didn't have time to go do anything else relative to like going to happy hours or going to different events and being seen at all these things. And I can't really say, because I'm guilty of that too now as I'm trying to raise awareness of Encore, and I'm still new back into the region. But I think there's too much focus on performative BS, and I'd like to just really incentivize the true builders to continue building, keep your heads down and build. Like, I was working with the Brex team when they were 8 people, I think. And this is, before they were even publicly announced, or they didn't even there was literally nothing about them, but we needed to hire a whole bunch of people. And Enrique and Pedro, I don't think those guys did anything but eat, sleep, and just work at Brex. And again, that's not for everybody. It's a different world. That's Silicon Valley and whatnot. But like, it wasn't so much that it was like the location. They were basically, these are 2 Brazilian kids that, happened to be in San Francisco. It was just a ruthless focus on the things that mattered. And I think that would be the one thing that I would say that I'm taking with me on this journey, is just strictly focusing on the things that matter. And for lack of a better term, it's talking to your users or talking to your customers, actually solving a specific problem that they have. Don't just build to build. You need to be solving a problem. And I think that oftentimes people get too focused on, oh, well, we can like really apply this technology to something interesting. Like, well, have you validated that? Have you talked to any customers or potential users that say you would use that? Did you get any LOI sign, anything like that? And even like a step deeper, I think that's even more important in this manufacturing sector, where you're trying to layer on technology to this relatively, non-tech forward business or a business unit or line or whatever. The founders in that sector that are just saying, hey, we can, really layer on some software to this, really interesting industrial process, like, maybe, but have you actually like validated that, or have you talked to that individual? And like, you need to get super, super clear. And that's one thing that I think we're focused on, is like, lean into the design partners. I think is one thing, is just, hey, is this a problem in which you need solved? How are you going about solving it right now? Let's help you. Would you be interested in using something like this? And then just really, really iterating quickly with them. So that was a long-winded answer for number one. And then number two is another probably hot take is, yeah, I actually used to like fundamentally hate the notion of like an operating system for business. And I was just like, oh, you losers, like you can't do it yourself. Like, what are you doing? It's, just have your KPIs and OKRs and go hit them. It's not that hard. And, the older I get and the more I talk to individuals and people in that world, and especially after meeting like Chris Snyder and Jim Haviland and the folks over at Impact Architects, like I've done a complete 180 on it. I think it's absolutely critical to have a business operating system within, like, when you go 0 to 1, if nothing else, for just sheer accountability, right? I think Jim likes to talk about rituals, languages, and artifacts being the same. We're instituting that at Encore to say, even at the fund level, we're going to have rituals, artifacts, and languages all be the same. We're going to run on 90. And then every single one of our companies that we have is also going to be in that exact same cohort of like running on 90. We're going to all speak the same language such that we can have a really, really articulate and educated and non-emotional conversation around like, where is the business now? Where do we want to go? And what do we need to do to get there? And then having specific metrics and milestones along the way. I think, I've had a career of being a cowboy and, shooting from the hip and a lot, but, honestly, that's a stupid way to go about it. And so I think, now the main thing that we're really updating is having this operating system, having clarity, prioritize and communicate. That's all you need to do.
Wow. Yeah. Both awesome takes. Perhaps hot in some circles, but that's what makes for a fun earned opinion as you have them. Well, congratulations on the first close. I think it's very exciting and kind of opens the door to, really all of these incredible things that you've outlined here today and the work still to be done. And so I'm excited to, follow along on the journey as it transpires and have you back to, give us an update.
Absolutely.
As you make your way through these ideas. But I did want to ask, as you have made your way through this idea maze and perhaps, you've reached, if not the end of the maze, but at least, enough vision and foresight to chart a path for, the exploration that Encore is now about to go down. If there are parts that you feel are important to this journey, your journey, that we haven't talked about, that you would want to call out?
I think I just want to reinforce this notion of like Cleveland and the Great Lakes region, like we are extremely capable and we are extremely able to really shepherd in a new era of companies, of innovation, of production. This is going to be an epicenter of productivity, I think, over the next few decades. And I think it's on us. I think to your point in your note around joining the Ohio Fund and Caleb Atwater, right? It's on us if we basically fumble all of this opportunity, right? And I obviously much more eloquently said in your comment and what he actually said, but we have this really interesting time, this inflection point in history. I think we've got young, hungry, capable leadership across the board. You've got, obviously Mayor Bibb, who's done a really nice job. You've got Craig Hassel coming in with a new perspective. And I think he recognizes a lot of what I've recognized since I've been moving back, where it's like, no, like Cleveland's effing awesome. Like, why is there such a negative connotation to all this stuff? And I think we need to shed this self-hatred and like this belief that we don't deserve and all this negativity. So many great things have come out of this region and this city specifically. And I think we're ready for our next act. And I think it's absolutely critical to just change that mindset such that, you can look forward to doing the stuff that you do on a daily basis because it is contributing to the overall return of a once great city. And I think we're very much on the path there. Let's just throw some gasoline on it, preferably not in our river, but at any rate, no, I think that's where we really want to focus on just shedding this notion that we don't deserve it, where we can't have it, or this mistake by the lake mentality. It's complete bullshit. And I think we want to completely change that narrative.
Well said. Onward and upward. Here we go. So with that, I will ask you our traditional closing question, which, you know what it is, but I'm curious what your answer will be for a hidden gem in Cleveland, something that other folks may not know about, but they should.
Yeah, it's this one. I mean, I kind of goes back to like the family and a place I've been to just tons and tons of times, really with my dad, like ever since I was born.
Yeah.
He had been going, I think, for like 50 some odd years, but it's this little, park. It's called Furnace Run in the Metro Parks. It's in Richfield, right off of Brecksville Road. I mean, I've probably gone there every single year since I've been able to walk. And my dad and I will just go over there and walk for, an hour, hour and a half, just talk about life, talk about different things, talk about business, talk about, relationships and what's been going on. Just, it always brings me to a like sense of clarity, and it's always just something that I look fondly to do and get to hang out with him. And I think that, what is it? It's called tree bathing or something, where just a simple walk through the forest is unbelievably beneficial to your brain and like the cognitive functions. So I think that would be my main spot. And then, I think the other piece, like it's not a hidden gem because you're obviously very, very vocal, but I think you as an institution, Jeff, have been just so unbelievable to so many different people in this city. I mean, ever since I've been back, I truly mean this when I say, like, I don't know if Encore exists without meeting you initially, and then you opening up your entire world and network, and just the amount of willingness to support me and the city more broadly. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing, and we need more of you. And again, anybody that has a chance to meet Jeff, I couldn't recommend it more, and come to the events that he posts and all that good stuff. So I do want to give you a huge, huge shout out and thank you. And, again, half of the people I think on your podcast I've had the opportunity to meet by virtue of you. So it's been wonderful. And yeah, I'm really excited about getting to hopefully partner up in some capacity with you and just continuing on this journey together as we bring back this once proud city into a globally prominent hub once again.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It certainly means a lot. It's the joy for me of getting to do this is getting to bring people together, and in the spirit of everything you just laid out. So it's I'm very excited to continue the journey. Yeah, and see and work with you to make it happen.
Let's do it. Onward.
If people had anything they wanted to follow up with you about, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, shoot me an email at andrew@encoreventurelabs.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I am, even though I mentioned this stuff about the performative nature of like all the happy hours and all the silliness of trying to just be seen at different events, like I am going to lean in a little bit to this like cringy marketing in some sense, because we just need to establish our brand, and ideally we'll make it somewhat cool along the way. So I will be quite a bit on LinkedIn. You'll probably have to see my face and hear my voice a little bit more, but hopefully it'll be coming from a good place, and elevating the region in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, those are probably the two best ways to find me. I need to get better at Twitter. I don't know anything about Instagram, although I know we have them. So feel free to follow us there and connect with us, because trying to, I guess, a rising tide lifts all boats, and it just happens to be my last name.
There it is. Well, for what it's worth, I enjoy the marketing. They're pretty fun.
It is good. And I actually shout out to those folks like Tommy over at Cheddar Studios. It's been fantastic. And it's just really, really cool and fun.
Well, Andrew, I just want to thank you for your time, for sharing your story, for all the work that you're doing here in Cleveland. And yeah, can't wait to see what comes of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Cool. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm, or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.